everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are returning to the topic of rope bondage. Earlier in the week we went over a scenario that went quite badly and looked at how it went wrong and everyone's response to that scenario. And what I want to do today is follow up on some of the ideas that I had in that discussion, because for me the most important part is rope bottom safety. That is the thing that I want to talk about. So we are going to go into detail on the vetting process, how to evaluate tops, basic safety information, and just whatever general things that I have that I think are important to know about when it comes to health and safety. Now, over the course of this, you will probably learn that rope bondage is quite dangerous, even more so than many of the other things that we do in BDSM. I have had people over time ask me for a BDSM 101 video on suspension. I can't really do that because rope bondage or suspension is not just one skill. It is many, many smaller pieces that all work together to get to one point. And building those things takes weeks, months, years for each piece to come together, which is why we have so many problems, because it does take such a long time to get to mastery in each one of those areas. Now, if you are not familiar with the world, the little niche of the community that is all about shibari or rope bondage, it has its own unique problems. So in the wider BDSM world, we do have issues like competent tops outnumbering bottoms, or people playing outside of their skill set, or people misrepresenting their experience level or getting into things too quickly. However, this is dialed up in rope bondage like by 5 or 10 times. It is a quite big issue and something that frankly is very difficult to handle and something we don't quite have an answer for. And all of these things are also amplified by the fact that the barrier to entry for rope, for suspension, is so much higher. So for example, if you want to do suspension, if you want to practice rope, just buying the rope, having enough to do what people usually do in a scene, that can take hundreds of dollars just to own the rope. That is not counting the classes or travel expenses to get the knowledge that you would need to do those things at all. And because these things are so costly, what ends up happening is the most experienced rope tops tend to only play with more experienced bottoms. And I'm sure you can see how all of these things would go together to make a scenario where the newer bottoms that don't know what they don't know end up playing with experienced tops that don't necessarily actually know what they're doing or actually have the bottom's best interest in mind. So let us start with the basics. Maybe you are a bottom that wants to find a top to finally start your rope journey with. The basic process where we start from is something called vetting. And vetting means that you are critically evaluating someone to better understand if this is a person you want to play with. The more typical advice that you would get for this is ask them how much experience they have, ask for references. I have talked about these things in other videos. However, those are kind of tricky because they're not necessarily as helpful on their own as you might think. So maybe you have someone that has 30 play partners and you don't know that, and they had very terrible scenes with 25 of them, and 5 are fine. They might only tell you about those 5 people. which means you think they are a better rope top, a better dom, a better whatever than they actually are. And that's not necessarily your fault, but it is something where people can be deceived when all they do is they ask the top for people they have played with before. The other problem is experience is a very vague thing. So someone might tell you that they have been tying for 15 years. That could mean they have been practicing rope every single day for 15 years. That could mean they do rope bondage twice a year on their anniversary and birthday, and that's really it. So you can have a numerical number of years you have been doing a thing, and it can mean so many different things about how many hours are actually behind that number. Another mistake that people make is they look at someone's FetLife profile. They look at their Instagram, they see the pretty photos, and they're like, oh wow, those are so beautiful. I want to be tied up just like that. However, if you are new and you don't know what a chest harness is supposed to look like, you don't know what an upline is, those photos don't actually give you all that much information. They can look really nice. They could be edited. They could be staged. You know, that model could have been in that tie for 2 seconds and then fell out of the fucking harness. You don't know. If you have more knowledge, you can look at photos and kind of evaluate, you know, somebody's style, what they kind of prefer to do, but photos are so easily manipulated and they don't give you any context that it's actually kind of dangerous to just go off of that when you are deciding this is someone I want to play with or not. If you are not looking at photos and you are not going off of just number of years they have been doing something, what should you be looking at instead? If you are talking to the top directly, there are a few things that I think are good to ask. So, for example, instead of asking, how long have you been doing rope bondage, I would ask, how often do you do rope bondage? Do you have a regular tying partner? Do you practice on yourself? This will tell you so much about how invested someone is in actually doing bondage. Do they keep up on their skills? Do they regularly attend classes? Do they actually practice what they do? Or do they do one course 10 years ago and then just try and remember what they did for the rest of time? That can give you way more valuable things than just asking, how long have you done this for? The next thing that I would look at is, do they know about rope bondage safety? Do they know the things that cause injury? This one does require you as a bottom to have some knowledge going into it. I will talk about this later. The best thing you can do is get your own knowledge. You should know as the bottom also what is dangerous, not just relying on the tops to tell you themselves. This would be things like, do they know about wrist drop? Do they know what causes it? Do they know how to evaluate for nerve damage? Do they know what to do if nerve damage does happen? Can they tell the difference between circulation issues and nerve issues? Do they think they are the same thing? These are also pieces of information that you would want to know for yourself. But if a top doesn't know about them, that is a big red flag. The next thing that I would do is I would ask them what they did in a scenario where something went wrong. This is a classic vanilla job interview question, but remember, when you are evaluating a top, you are basically interviewing them for the job of being your top. So your safety should be your first priority. This can give you a few different pieces of information. If they tell you nothing has ever gone wrong, they are either lying or do not have enough experience to where that has happened before. You can be the world's greatest rope top. You can be God's gift to the art of shibari. Eventually, mistakes will happen because this is a high-risk thing to do. You can do everything perfectly and something can still happen. There are many different things that could have happened that they can tell you about. Maybe they had a rope jam. Maybe they had to cut somebody out of rope. Maybe somebody fainted. Maybe somebody threw up. There are so many possibilities here. The important thing is, can they name something that happened? Do they admit fault where there is fault? Did they handle it correctly? And finally, did they make a plan and execute on that plan for improvement, so that way that scenario doesn't happen again in the future? Those are the key things to look at. Now, I would say it is actually better, to some extent, to not just ask the top those questions. I think getting a sense of how the community feels about them is actually really powerful. I have mentioned this many times in my videos. So for example, if somebody doesn't want to go to a public play space, that is probably a red flag, right? You want to know, has this person been blacklisted? Do they regularly go to events? Does anyone even know who the heck this person is to begin with? There are a couple of different ways that you can do this, right? You can see if they go to classes, if they go to local events, if they go to Skillshares. My favorite thing to look at, though, is something that is usually called a rope bottom share group. I have seen more of these pop up on local levels, and it's a really, really great thing. So what a rope bottom share group is it is a way for rope bottoms to directly connect with each other and talk about tops, talk about scenes, and talk about their experiences. And the reason why this is so valuable is it helps people stay connected, especially with how strict FetLife is about naming names and talking about people directly. It can be very difficult for new people to know who is dangerous, who has violated whose consent, who plays what way. And I think the best way to get an honest answer about how somebody is as a rope top is to ask people that are in that community, that are more experienced, that have played with these people, that know their reputation, and that is going to be your most important asset. So if you have anything like this, I would recommend it. If all else fails, you can also go to other educational places, go to play parties, go to meetups, and just talk to bottoms directly. But whatever you do, I think talking to other bottoms, sharing that knowledge is so important. So do not be afraid to ask or reach out. Our primary goal is to keep other bottoms and switches safe. I also recommend, if you can, to watch somebody play first. This will give you a lot of information. Are they willing to play in public at all? How do they do their scenes? How do they communicate? What is their energy like, right? How do they handle aftercare? What are they like in the scene? Are they very focused on just the rope, or do they stay connected with their partner? Do they seem really aggressive and pushy, or do they seem calm and measured with how they do their bondage? I know that this one is more difficult because a lot of us have just lost our local dungeons entirely due to COVID, or we haven't been able to go to dungeons and still aren't because things are closed down. But if you have an option at all to do this, really do it. I highly recommend it. The other thing you can do if you are watching someone or talking to someone, listen to your gut. I know so many people that just do not honor their gut at all when that instinct is telling them don't do something, don't play with someone, because they would rather ignore that and get to have a scene than try to evaluate why they are having that reaction in the first place. So I think if you are getting a reaction that's like, oh, I don't know if I like this, this seems kind of scary, I don't know if I kind of mesh with this person, listen to that. That will help keep you safe. And if it turns out your initial read was incorrect or it changes, you can always go back and play with them again at another time. Speaking of trusting your gut instinct, I think something that really raises red flags for me is when you have a rope top that only plays with really new people. So for some reason, a lot of people have a fetish for popping people's rope cherry. And in some ways, it's nice that somebody is willing to take a chance on a newer bottom. However, when it is a pattern of behavior where they only play with new people, think about why that might be. Why is the 45-year-old top with 20 years of experience playing with 18-year-olds that have been in the scene for 2 months? Why is it they have a rotating cast of people they play with, but never the same people twice in a row? What's going on there? Why is there this carousel of young people that this 45-year-old is playing with? Why is it that these people are often closed off from other members of the community? Why is it they seem to stay away from older and more experienced rope bottoms? I'm not saying that age gaps are bad. I'm not saying that it's inherently wrong for somebody that is in their 40s to tie up a young adult. I would just double check those motivations and really, really be careful if you find yourself in a scenario that is at all like what I just described. Now, let's say you have gotten to the point where you have found someone that passes that initial smell test, right? They seem to practice often, they have a good reputation amongst other bottoms, you vibe with them in general, you seem like you're gonna get along. There are still things to think about before you actually go about playing. So I would ask if you can actually personally look at their rope kit. This is for a few reasons. So I would try to find out in advance what diameter of rope are they using? What type of rope? How old is it? If you look at it, does it smell funky? And with hemp and things like that, it'll have kind of a grassy smell. But I mean like moldy smell, right? If they have jute, do they maintain it regularly? Is it dirty? Does it seem like kind of just shoved in a bag and left like knotted up? I would consider it a bad idea to then proceed doing, let's say, a suspension with a moldy, untaken care of kit of rope that has been really, really worn down from 3+ years of use and should likely be retired. I would also see if they have things like a first aid kit and safety shears. Oh my God, please do not do rope bondage without safety shears, because that can literally be the only thing between you and sweet, sweet death. So please play with safety shears. If they do not have them in the bag, ask them where they keep them, right? DMs at dungeons will usually have safety shears, but you should not rely on somebody getting there in time if you do happen to need them. And if they do have these supplies, I would also ask if they ever practice using them. I would hope that no one ever has to use safety shears in a real life scenario, but if you want to have the best outcome, it is good to practice using them so you know how to handle them in a non-emergency scenario where you have that time to think about what you're doing instead of trying to figure it out when you are already in a panic. Especially if you are not able to watch this person first, I would really recommend stepping into a play scenario with them quite slowly. I think the best thing you can do is play in public, but not even actually do a scene. We usually have things like practice sessions or rope jams where it's literally about just like trying new things, sharing ideas, asking other people for help, and this is a much lower pressure environment. You are there to just have a casual, fun time and see how rope feels on you and what you like and what you don't like. And this will give you so much information, right? You can see is my energy good with this person? If I play non-sexually, do they bring a sexual energy into this that I'm not looking for? How do they practice? Do we communicate with each other well? And this casual practice scenario also means it's less likely you will get into a headspace where your judgment will be compromised, because just by the nature of practicing and giving feedback, you are less likely to go into subspace or rope space, which may limit your communication and awareness. From there, you may actually get to the point where you decide, I want to do a real scene with this person. If you get there, congrats, I'm so happy for you. Still things you need to think about. I'm so sorry to tell you. Number one is playing in public. I cannot encourage this enough. Play in public if you can. It will keep you safe. Number one reason why for rope bondage that people don't think about is hard points. So hard points are the thing in the ceiling that help keep your ass in the air and not on the ground. If a hard point is bad, you will fall on your ass. And when you play in public, it is at least the best insurance/legal interest of the dungeon to make sure those hard points are installed correctly. And as a bottom, you will typically not have the skill set to evaluate a hard point by yourself. So instead of trusting somebody's shoddily put together homemade hard point, playing in public allows you to know, hey, this is probably pretty solid, and just eliminates that as a higher potential risk. If you are playing in public, I would also recommend using a crash mat. The type they use for bouldering is a really good option, because if you are playing in a dungeon which typically has a hard surface because it's easier to clean, having a mat can be the difference between something being a bruise and a permanent injury. So if you can, request using a mat. Really, really good idea. Even if you are playing in public, I would recommend having a spotter. This is somebody that is there just to watch your scene. This means you have somebody that can step in directly if you safe word and your partner doesn't respond, or if something happens and your top needs help, bringing you down or carrying your body or supporting your weight in some way. That is why you want to have a spotter, because they can be there immediately. You can also forewarn a DM that you are doing a scene and you would like them to watch closely. I have done this when I have volunteered as a DM in the past. That can be a good alternative if you don't really have a lot of close contacts or somebody that's going to that same party. But having a spotter is a really good idea when you are doing something that is risky and when you are playing with a new person. Since you are literally getting tied up, things like consent violations or communication issues are even more prominent, I am quite sad to say. So, knowing that, I would really recommend not adding anything in that can impede your ability to communicate. That would be things like using a ball gag, using any kind of gag, or using rope that might restrict your diaphragm such that you find it more difficult to breathe or verbalize. Even if you do maintain a way to verbalize, I would recommend having a non-verbal safe word in place. This could be something like waving your hands, squeezing, tapping. This is also good because your spotter can watch for that safe signal so they know more clearly, oh, this is happening now, I may need to step in, whereas they may not be able to hear you actually say a safe word if the environment is too loud. I do, however, recommend sticking with plain English communication. No means no, yes means yes, I have 5 minutes means I have 5 minutes. I really encourage this because, playing with no and stop is fun and all. Unfortunately, there are tops that basically blame the bottoms for communication because they say, oh, well, I didn't know she actually meant no because we were playing around and I thought she might be bratting, so that's why I didn't stop. It's bullshit. It's stupid. Make sure your partner is willing to agree to plain English, or I guess whatever language you're speaking, before the scene starts. Okay, so my battery died, and there is a few more things I want to touch on before we end this video. So one thing that I talked about earlier was called rope space, and I want to get into that with a little bit more detail. So if you know about BDSM, you may have heard of something called subspace. This is an altered state of mind that you get into when you engage in kink activities. Rope space is the version of this that happens while you are doing rope bondage. And the reason why I bring this one up is because for some reason, people are more likely to get into rope space seemingly than other types of subspace. I know many people where as soon as rope is on them, they're out, they're boom, full on rope space. And that can be really, really nice because one of the appeals of doing rope bondage can be achieving that altered, floaty state of mind. And with a trusted partner, it can be a wonderful thing. However, if you are brand new and you don't know about rope space or what it does to you or how you get into it, that can leave you with some pretty dangerous scenarios. So you might be somebody that is typically a masochist, right? And you do spanking and paddling and whatever else, and maybe it takes you a really long time to get into what we would call like normal subspace. However, you might then go into rope bondage and just conk out immediately. Again, it can be fun. It can also be dangerous. So I would be aware of what this is. I would plan, just as a precaution, that when you do your first few scenes, that rope space could happen immediately. The reason why I want people to know about this is the number one way that consent violation happens in rope bondage is somebody plays with a new top in private, they go into subspace or rope space immediately, and the top takes advantage of that to do things outside of what they negotiated. And playing in public, playing with a spotter, can minimize those issues versus playing alone. I would also say it is a good idea to talk to your partner about what to do if you fall into rope space. So you might say, hey, I don't know what's going to happen. I may stop communicating with you. If that happens, here's what I want to do. I would recommend that the scene ends, that play stops. If you do really mesh, you click, you go into subspace, rope space, whatever right away, great. You know that you have 100 amazing scenes on the way. But the first few times, I think it's really good to build up that trust that you know that person will stop when you have negotiated that they should. And also, just as a top, I think it's a good idea to end the scene to bring them down if they do start to go nonverbal. You might think that they're in rope space and loving it, but you don't know. You're not in their head. They could be in rope space. They could be having a panic attack. They could be having a trauma flashback. You don't know, especially with a new person. So play cautiously, play slowly. Going into rope space can be wonderful. What is better is having 100 amazing scenes versus one that ends very poorly. But really, I think the best thing that you can do to keep yourself safe is to have your own knowledge. I know I may be biased here because it is literally my job to teach people, but where I see things go really wrong is when people don't know what they don't know, their tops don't inform them, they don't realize as bottoms that they should be informed, and then shit hits the fan. The more knowledge you have, the more you can evaluate accurately the skill set of people that you are playing with. Some people over the years have just considered rope bottoming to be like modeling. You show up, you get tied, that's it. You do not contribute to the scene at all. I am happy to say that that perspective has been changing over the years. I would say certainly in the last 5 years, we have seen a lot more rope bottom focused education. If you see those classes, take them. They will be worth it. And rope bottoming should be honored as a skill set unto itself because you can bring so much to the table. You bring that knowledge of yourself. What is good pain versus bad pain? How can you tell when you have nervy, tingly feelings? Do you know where your nerves are? Can you tell how long you have in a particular position? What are your aftercare needs? How do you warm up before engaging in play? All of those things are key pieces of information. Also, keep in mind, having a general knowledge of how rope bondage works, how it is constructed, the physics of everything, that can also be helpful knowledge, because when you know what things should look like, when you know the questions to ask about how things are constructed, you are going to be able to evaluate where your top is much more easily. You do not need to have a partner in most cases to go as a solo bottom to rope bondage classes. You can go just as a spectator, just to learn, just to watch what other people are doing. If you live somewhere where there's not a lot of classes, or it's really limited and you have to have a partner to get in the door, there are other alternatives which are kind of approximate but actually do a fairly good job. So down below, I will leave some of my favorite online resources. There are so many options these days for online learning about BDSM, about rope bondage, especially. So many good websites and people out there with good, factual, even scientifically based information. I would say, as a caution, do not use this as a substitute for real life education. That is the best thing that you can do. I recommend this as a supplement, as something to tide you over to start with, but online resources should not be your only source of information. And whether it be online or in person, I do recommend getting your resources, getting your knowledge from many different sources. If you are, let's say, in person, right? Your local dungeon may only have classes from one person, and it could turn out that that one person has no idea what the fuck they're talking about. They just pretend to, and no one knows enough to question them. So if you learn from more than one source, it will minimize the risk that you are getting incorrect or outdated information. And there's so many other things that I could talk about here that are really important to know about, but I just do not have the time. This could be a 2-hour-long class easily. So instead, again, please go to those resources down below. They are a wonderful place to start. I would also say, take this information, but combine it with other things I have covered about red flags, vetting, negotiation, all of that good stuff, and use that as like the beginning of your ball of like rope bottom knowledge to keep yourself safe and stay healthy. That is always what I want for everyone. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this. If you stayed until the very end, I just appreciate you so very much. If you did like this, if you have not already, please do subscribe, because I make videos twice a week about all sorts of kink and BDSM related topics. If you really enjoyed this, if you want to support my channel, the best way that you can do that is by supporting me on Patreon. That is what makes this channel and all of these videos possible, and there will be a link to it down below if you would like to check it out. If you do already support me over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.